All right, let's dive right in. There's a firestorm brewing around Brazil's Supreme Court, especially after the January 8th attacks. You've probably heard the accusation that the court is on a political witch hunt. But, a new analysis we're looking at today, it flips that entire story on its head, and what it reveals is, frankly, way more complex and explosive than it first seems.
So, at the very center of this whole thing is one very powerful accusation. That this is all just a politically motivated witch hunt. And we've seen that exact phrase used, right, by figures like Donald Trump, aimed squarely at the legal proceedings against former President Jair Bolsonaro and his supporters.
And that really sets up the big question we need to wrestle with today. Is Brazil's highest court actually launching a political attack? Or is this something else entirely? Is this a democracy fighting to defend itself from a threat it's never seen before? To even begin to get to the bottom of that, we have to first get our language straight, because a ton of the international criticism really comes down to two very important and very often confused legal ideas.
Okay, so it all boils down to this. On one side, you've got judicial activism. That's kind of what it sounds like, right? A judge basically going rogue, making a ruling based on their own personal politics, not the actual law. But then there's this other thing, judicialization of politics. That's completely different. That's when a court has to step in on some huge political mess because the other parts of government, like the legislature, have failed to act. And that distinction? It's everything.
So let's be super clear. Judicial activism, that's the specific charge fueling this whole witch hunt story. The accusation is that these judges are breaking the rules, that they're just driven by their own political agendas. The real question, though, is, does that claim actually hold water when you look at the facts?
All right, so now that we've got our terms straight, let's actually apply them. Let's look at what Brazil's Supreme Court, the STF, actually did after the attacks on January 8th. Was it activism, or was it something else?
Well, when you actually look at what happened, it just doesn't seem to fit the definition of activism. I mean, the court didn't just act on its own whim. It acted because the prosecutor general requested it. It stayed within its constitutional boundaries. And this is the really critical part. Every single person accused was given full due process. They had the right to challenge everything, and they were guaranteed a full, robust defense. See, that's not activism. That's just procedure.
And then you get this absolutely stunning counter-argument. It's from Stephen Levitsky, the Harvard professor who co-wrote How Democracies Die, so he knows a thing or two about this. And he makes this incredible claim, that Brazil's ability to handle these attacks actually shows its democracy is getting stronger. That's the complete opposite of the whole witch hunt narrative.
Now, to really grasp the deeper stakes here, we need to look at a playbook. It's the playbook for modern authoritarians, and it's captured perfectly by a metaphor from that same book, How Democracies Die.
The idea is pretty simple, but it's also kind of chilling. To win, an aspiring autocrat doesn't just play the game better, they capture the referee. And in the big game of democracy, who are the referees? They're the courts. They're the judges. The very people who are supposed to make sure the game is played fair for everybody.
And look, this isn't just some vague theory. It's a pretty clear four-step strategy. Step 1, you pack the courts with people who are loyal to you. Step 2, you try to dismantle or take over the institutions themselves. Before you know it, you're using the law selectively, punishing your enemies and protecting your friends. The goal is simple. Make the referee work for your team, and only your team.
And this is where it gets really interesting. If that's the playbook, then we have to ask ourselves a pretty uncomfortable question. Could this whole international witch hunt narrative, could it be an attempt to capture the referee, but by undermining and discrediting the court from the outside?
Okay, let's bring all this together now, because this is where the whole story takes a fascinating and, honestly, a paradoxical twist. It flips the entire narrative we started with completely upside down.
So after going through all of this, we're left with one simple question. If there is a witch hunt happening here, who's actually being hunted?
And here it is. Here's the twist. The paper argues that the whole witch hunt narrative, it's basically a smokescreen. The real targets of persecution here,
They aren't the defendants. They're the Supreme Court justices themselves who are being relentlessly attacked for simply doing their constitutional duty.
And this isn't just speculation, right? The evidence for this pressure campaign is concrete. We're talking about direct attacks on judges. We're talking about international restrictions aimed at specific ministers, like Alexandra de Moraes. There are calls for personal sanctions against them and even threats of massive economic tariffs against the entire country. That's what a real pressure campaign looks like.
And so, that leaves us with one last really crucial question to think about. When the referee is attacked, not for breaking the rules, but for enforcing them, you have to ask yourself, what is the real game being played here? And that question, it gets right to the heart of how any democracy, anywhere, is supposed to defend itself.